Welcome to this introductory module of the JIAF, the Joint Intersectoral Analysis Framework. My name is Marcus Elton. I work for OCHA's Assessment, Planning and Monitoring branch.
The JIAF is a multi-partner endeavor that brings together UN agencies, NGOs, and donors.
This module is the first of 4 modules providing a broad overview of the JIAF approach. The other 3 modules will further unpack the JIAF approach. The second module explains the JIAF concept in more detail. The third module will take a closer look at the JIAF methodology, and the last and fourth module will discuss the key steps of the JIAF process. Each module is about 20 minutes short. Together they constitute a non-technical induction package. More advanced technical training material is available on the JIAF website and OCHA's knowledge management platform.
This session is part of a broader training plan for JIAF 1.1. The plan is composed of 3 elements: 4 high-level pre-recorded presentations, 8 more in-depth blended sessions, and workshops and webinars.
So what is the JIAF concept? The JIAF provides humanitarian actors with a common analytical framework and a system to gather, structure and synthesize information regarding the intersectoral needs of populations in crisis. The JIAF offers a methodological approach and a structured sense-making process to support regular joint needs analysis through supporting the collation, analysis and storage of data, providing a way to organize what data to collect and how to analyze it, guiding a joint analysis process involving multiple stakeholders, and serving as a driver for collaboration between humanitarian actors. The most common use case of the JIAF to date is to help inform the development of an HNO, a humanitarian needs overview, which in turn helps to inform an HRP, a humanitarian response plan. So its purpose is to help inform the decision-making process when planning a coordinated response through a holistic, people-centered, that is the key term here, people-centered and inclusive joint intersectoral analysis system that is both comprehensive and methodologically rigorous. For those wondering about the JIAF origins, the JIAF was developed based on a review of several commonly used analytical frameworks back in 2007 and many rounds of interagency and multi-stakeholder consultations with JIAC partners. Those include global cluster leads and several NGOs. Among the frameworks that were reviewed, you would find the Multidimensional Poverty Index from 2010, the IPC, the Integrated Face Classification Analysis Framework from 2013, the MIRA Analysis Framework, the ICRC Economic Security Conceptual Framework from 2015, and so on. So a broad review of existing frameworks out there. Let's look at the 2 core components of the JIAF. First, the conceptual framework, which you see here on this slide. The conceptual framework is built around 5 pillars, starting at the top with the context, then event shock, and then the impact, and the humanitarian conditions, and finally the last pillar at the bottom, the current and forecasted priority needs. Each pillar contains sub-pillars. You see in the context, there are 9 defined, starting with political, economic, social-cultural, etc., all the way to infrastructure. The event shocks pillar distinguishes between drivers and underlying factors or pre-existing vulnerabilities. The impact pillar looks at humanitarian access, the impact on systems and services, and the impact on people. The fourth pillar, the humanitarian conditions, features here three sub-pillars: living standards, coping mechanisms, physical and mental well-being, and then the whole dimension of severity of needs. The main purpose of these pillars and sub-pillars is to help organize information and visualize the relationships and bring a consistent structure to the analysis you are doing. So put simply, the JIAF conceptual framework should help tell the story about how a population has been affected by a shock or stress in a consistent and comprehensive manner. In a nutshell, that's what the conceptual framework is for. The other key component of the JIAF is a severity model. Its purpose is to help measure the degree of harm brought by the combined impact of shocks and stresses on affected vulnerable populations. The severity model has basically two components: a severity scale, as featured in this slide, with 5 defined severity classes ranging from minimal to catastrophic. The other component is a list of agreed, standardized, and scaled indicators used to assess the humanitarian conditions that feature in this pillar 4 in the conceptual framework on the previous slide, if you remember. Now, modules 2 and 3 of this induction package will unpack the conceptual framework and the severity model in more detail. So to learn more about how this works, please do listen into the modules 2 and 3. Wrapping up this short introductory module, please note that a successful application of the JIAF approach needs to be supported by a consultative process. Under the leadership of the Humanitarian Country Team, HCT, and Intercluster Coordination Group, the ICCG, a small JIAF team should be put together, made up of UN agencies, NGOs, and local actors. Members of this small JIAF team should either bring technical expertise in analysis or whose views are critical for the validation of the analysis. The purpose of this small JIAF team is to do the heavy lifting and to drive the process while reporting back to the respective coordination platforms as agreed at the outset of the process. Now, commonly, the JIAF process is embedded in an HPC, a humanitarian program cycle process, and integrated into the key steps for developing an HNO, the Humanitarian Needs Overview. The JIAF basically proposes 5 key steps for the process. The first step is to plan and design basically the process. This is a really important step. This is where, with partners, one agrees on what to focus on, what is in the analysis, what's outside of the analysis. So basically the output of this first step is a reviewed analysis framework and sort of a simple work plan. Step 2 is where one collates and collects the data. This is where sort of the initial intersectoral analysis narrative is being developed. In step 3 is where one consolidates the JIAF data. This is when the work around the indicators happens. With help of the indicators, a preliminary PIN, people in need number, will be developed. In step 4 is then where the sort of the JIAF analysis happens. This is where one revisits the initial intersectoral narrative. This is where it's being refined. This is where one looks at the pin estimates that have been produced are being discussed, being refined, and this is also where one attempts to do projections, looking ahead how the situation is going to evolve for the time which the plan one tries to, or the response one tries to inform, basically spans. And in the last step, step 5, is where the analysis would be validated, and where the elements of the outputs are being then transformed, and if it's part of an HPC process, are being integrated into the HNO, the Humanitarian Needs Overview. With this, we're coming to the end of this module. During this module, we looked at the JIAF concept, this idea of providing humanitarian actors with a common analytical framework and a system to gather, structure, and synthesize information. And this attempt to have a truly intersectoral and people-centered analysis. We looked briefly at the methodology and the 2 key components of it, the conceptual framework and its 5 pillars, and the severity model, which attempts to measure the degree of harm of a shock or a driver. And it does this with the help of the 2 components. One is the severity scale, a standardized severity scale, and a list of agreed standardized indicators. And finally, we looked briefly at the JIAF process, which should be a consultative process, and is ideally led by a small JIAF team which does the heavy lifting. We concluded this model by looking at the 5 key steps of the JIAF process. Modules 2, 3, and 4 will go into further detail on these aspects. Many thanks for taking the time to view this module and your attention.